Notice something the next time you wake up, before a thought forms, before you even know what day it is, before you've decided to be happy or sad or tired. Watch what your hand does. It reaches for the phone, not because someone called, not because you were expecting something, just reaches, like a reflex, like breathing. And I'm not going to tell you that's an addiction. That's not what this is about. What I want you to notice is something deeper, something the phone is actually doing for you in those first 4 seconds of consciousness. It's interrupting you from yourself, before you've had a single moment to just be there. That reflex, that reach, that is the beginning of everything we're going to talk about today. There is something almost no one talks about when they talk about happiness, not the kind that comes from a good day or a person who makes you laugh or a moment that surprised you. I mean the other kind, the kind that has no source, no reason, the kind that doesn't need anything to be different than it already is. Most people have never felt it. And the strange thing is that most people are terrified of it. Watch this closely. There's a pattern in how people spend their days that almost no one recognizes in themselves. Every gap gets filled, not with intention, not with choice, just filled. Waiting for coffee, check the phone, walk from one room to another, turn something on, sitting in a car, music, podcast, anything. 5 minutes between tasks, scroll. And here is what I want you to understand. This isn't laziness. It isn't even distraction in the way people usually mean it. It's something older, something that was operating in you long before smartphones existed, long before screens. Because this pattern, this compulsive filling of every silence, it points to something the mind does when it senses a particular kind of danger. The danger of being left alone with itself. You've done this before. You've been in a quiet room, not because you wanted to be, and within 60 seconds, something in you becomes restless, not bored, not tired, something closer to threatened. And so, you find something, anything, because the alternative feels unbearable. But here's what no one asks. What exactly is unbearable about it? What is in the silence that the mind refuses to face? Ancient traditions that studied the mind, not as something spiritual, but as something observable, noticed this pattern thousands of years ago. They noticed that the human mind almost never rests in the present moment, not because of weakness, but because the present moment, unoccupied, is where the mind meets itself. And most minds have never been taught to do that. So they run, not away from problems, away from the observer, away from the one who would have to sit there and simply notice what's actually happening inside. This is the part most people miss. It's not that the silence is empty, it's that the silence is full of things the mind has been carefully, quietly avoiding. You know, a particular kind of thought, not the ones you choose to think, the ones that come back on their own. Sometimes it's a conversation, one you had years ago, one that should mean nothing now, but there it is again. The exact words, the exact feeling in your chest. Sometimes it's a person, someone who did something or didn't, and you think about it, not once, again and again. And here is the thing that never gets questioned. Why? Not why did they do it? Why does the mind return there? Uninvited, automatic, as if it has a will of its own. Watch this closely. The mind does not repeat painful things by accident. It repeats them because it's trying to solve them. It believes, on some level below your conscious awareness, that if it replays the moment one more time, at a different angle, with different words, maybe it resolves, maybe it finally makes sense. And so it runs the loop again and again, and the loop never closes, because the loop was never the problem. There is a particular kind of suffering that no one talks about in therapy or self-help books. It's not the event that hurt you, it's what happens after. The original pain is the first arrow. It lands, It stings. It leaves a mark. That is life. That is unavoidable. But then you fire a second arrow into the same spot by replaying it, by arguing with it, by needing it to have been different, by keeping it alive in the mind as an open question that demands an answer that will never come. And I want you to understand something. This is not stupidity. This is not weakness. It is the mind doing exactly what it was built to do. It is a problem-solving machine encountering a problem that cannot be solved, a fact that cannot be unfactored, a past that cannot be changed. And so it loops. Because it doesn't know how to close a file it cannot finish. You've felt this. You've tried to think your way out of something and only thought yourself deeper in. You went to bed with it, woke up with it, and the thought that every rational part of you insisted was irrational kept coming back. Because it was never about logic. It was about the mind's refusal to let go of what it cannot control. Here is something strange, something almost no one notices. When you're alone, truly alone, no one watching, no one who will ever know, you still perform. You rehearse arguments. You replay conversations. You imagine how you'd explain yourself to someone, to no one. And sometimes you feel things that only make sense if someone else is watching. You feel righteous. You feel wronged. You feel quietly proud of something no one else will ever see. Who is that performance for? This is one of the oldest observations in the study of mind. The self, in some ways, is not a private experience. It is a social construction that does not turn off when you're alone. There is always an imagined observer, an audience the mind invented, and then forgot it invented. And here is the uncomfortable part. Most of what you call your inner life is not actually inner. It's a rehearsal. It's an ongoing, unending preparation for how you will present yourself to a world that mostly isn't watching. Think about this. You've had moments of anger in a room by yourself. Not vague irritation, real anger, hot. And in that anger you've said things, maybe not out loud, but in your head, pointed, clear, sharp, to the exact person who isn't there. And you've felt it, felt the satisfaction of it. Even though nothing happened, even though no one heard. What is that? What is the mind doing when it runs that scene? Ancient observers of the mind would say something simple. They would say the self is largely a story told to an imaginary audience for reasons the teller cannot explain. And being alone doesn't stop the story. It just removes the last reason to tell it truthfully. Here is a behavior almost no one admits to. Returning to what hurts them. Not once, repeatedly. The relationship that was bad from the beginning. The pattern that always ends the same way. The version of yourself you said you were done with. And people explain this as weakness, as stupidity, as bad luck. But here is what's actually happening. The mind does not seek pleasure as its highest priority. It seeks the known. Familiarity is not just comfort. For the mind, familiarity is safety. Even when what's familiar is pain. Even when what's predictable is suffering. The mind will choose the suffering it understands over the peace it doesn't recognize. Watch this closely. A person who has spent years in anxiety doesn't just suffer from anxiety. They begin to organize their life around it. They make decisions based on it. They explain themselves through it. They know who they are in the context of it. And then, in a quiet moment, when the anxiety lifts, when something is actually okay, there is an unease, a reaching for the problem, a looking for what's wrong, because what's wrong is where they live. And peace feels like an unfamiliar country where they don't speak the language. This is not metaphor, this is observable. The brain forms grooves, not metaphorical ones, actual neural pathways, paths of least resistance that run toward the familiar, regardless of whether the familiar is good. And here is the part that cuts. If you have lived in a particular kind of pain for long enough, If that pain has been your companion, your story, your reason, then the prospect of letting it go is not liberating. It's terrifying, because without it, who are you? You've felt this. Maybe not that clearly, but there has been a moment when something good happened, and instead of receiving it fully, something in you was already looking for the catch, already preparing for the loss, already building the story of how this wouldn't last. Because the story of things not lasting is a story you know, and you know how to live inside it. There is a reason people cannot sit with silence, and it has nothing to do with boredom. Boredom is what you call it, because boredom has a simple solution. Find something interesting, problem solved. But this is not boredom. This is the mind encountering the absence of its own narration and not knowing what it is without that narration running. Here is something to try, not as advice, just as an experiment. Sit somewhere quiet, no phone, no sound, and do nothing. Not meditation, not breathing exercises, not trying to relax. Just do nothing. And watch what the mind does. Within 40 seconds, it will generate a thought, a task you forgot, a worry, a memory, something, because the mind does not tolerate a gap. It treats emptiness the way the body treats hunger, as a signal, as a problem to solve, and so it fills. What ancient traditions noticed, not as spiritual wisdom, but as plain observation, is that the thoughts the mind generates in those moments are almost never about right now. They are almost always about the past or the future, replaying, rehearsing, regretting, projecting, almost never. Just this, just here, just now, because the present moment has a quality the mind resists. It cannot be argued with, it cannot be improved by thinking, it simply is. And the mind, which believes its entire value is in its thinking, has no role there. Think about it practically. Everything the mind worries about exists in time. Something that happened, something that might happen. The present moment has no problem, not because life is good, but because problems, by definition, require past or future, and the mind that can only process time experiences the present as a kind of silence, a static, an empty channel, and it finds it unbearable. Here is the contradiction at the center of all of this. You are not only the thoughts. You know this. You've noticed the thought. You've watched it arise. You've seen it from a slight distance and recognized it. Recognized something, but the thing that recognized the thought, the thing that noticed, that is not the thought itself. There is something in you that watches, not the mind that chatters, not the planner or the worrier or the storyteller. Something quieter, something that was there before this day's worries began, before this year's concerns, before the story you've been telling about yourself had any words. Most people have only glimpsed this. In moments of total absorption, when you were so inside something, so fully present to what you were doing, that the narrator went quiet, and in that silence, something was still there, still aware, still experiencing, just. Without the commentary, ancient observations of the mind pointed to this again and again, not as an achievement, not as an enlightened state, simply as what is always already there beneath the noise. They notice that humans suffer not primarily from their circumstances, but from the constant commentary on their circumstances, the running narration that turns an ordinary moment into a judgment, into a verdict, into evidence for a story about what kind of person they are and what kind of life they deserve. And the question they kept returning to was simple. What would remain if the commentary stopped? Not forever, not in some permanent altered state, just for a moment. What is here when the story goes quiet? Most people never ask this, because the story is all they've ever known themselves to be. There is something almost everyone believes without knowing they believe it. That being alone is a statement about your worth, not a logical belief, not one you'd admit if asked, but watch how it operates. A free Saturday, with nowhere to be, is experienced differently by someone who chose it and someone who didn't. Same room, same silence, same emptiness. One is rest, one is rejection. The difference is not the room. The difference is the story the mind tells about what the room means. And the mind is very fast at generating that story, especially on bad days. Especially when things have gone wrong. Especially when you're tired and the defenses are down and the old tapes start playing. You've heard these tapes. Something is wrong with me. I am too much. I am not enough. This is what I deserve. These are not truths. They are not even beliefs. Exactly. They are conditioned responses. Patterns laid down early, when you were too young to question them, now running automatically as the default interpretation of your own aloneness. Here is the uncomfortable observation. Most people's relationship with themselves is not a relationship at all. It is an ongoing trial where they are simultaneously the accused, the prosecutor, and the judge, and the jury. And the verdict is almost always the same. Not good enough, should be different, should have done better. And being alone is just the moment when the trial reconvenes. Without the distraction of others to delay the proceedings, this is why solitude feels like punishment. Not because you are alone, but because you are alone with a mind that treats you like a problem to be solved. This is the part most people miss. When people talk about being alone, they talk about two things: being lonely, or being okay with being alone. And they treat these as opposites, but they aren't opposites. They are two different relationships with the same condition. And neither of them is the thing I'm pointing toward. There is a third possibility: not tolerating aloneness, not feeling lonely, but actually being present to the one person you have never fully met. Yourself, not your personality, not your habits, not your history, not the self you perform for others or the self you criticize in private. The one underneath all of that, the one that was there before the story began. And here is the strange thing. Most people find this idea calming in theory and terrifying in practice, because to meet yourself, really meet yourself, you have to stop running the trial. You have to stop generating evidence. You have to just sit there and not know what to do, and not fix it, and not explain it. And that is one of the hardest things a human mind can attempt. On your worst days, the days when something breaks, when someone leaves, when a plan collapses, and the version of the future you'd been quietly constructing in the background suddenly isn't there anymore. On those days, something interesting happens to the structure of the self. The scaffolding comes down, the performances stop, the planning stops, the self-management stops, and what's left is something very raw, something that feels like breaking and is often described as falling apart. But here is what actually happens in those moments. If you've ever really been inside one, you know this. Underneath the breaking, underneath the pain, there is something that is simply still, watching, not okay, necessarily, not at peace, but present. Here, observing the storm from a place that is somehow not the storm itself. That is not nothing. That quiet place inside the worst day. That still point. That is what everyone is looking for in every crowded room, in every relationship, in every achievement that doesn't quite land the way they thought it would. And it is only accessible in the direction you've been avoiding. Not because suffering is good, not because you should seek it, but because the worst days strip away the noise and the performance and the running and leave you with something that was there the whole time. The one who was never actually in danger. There is a kind of happiness that people almost never discover because they are too busy looking in the right direction. The direction where things change, where circumstances improve, where the right person arrives, where the right thing happens. And sometimes those things do arrive, and the happiness comes. and it is real, but it moves. It is always moving, because it came from something outside, and everything outside moves. The happiness that doesn't move, the one that has no cause, the one that is just here, as the base layer beneath the day. Not joy, not excitement, something quieter, like the silence beneath sound, like the screen that still exists after the movie ends. This is what ancient observers of the mind kept pointing toward, not as a spiritual reward, not as something earned through discipline, but as something already present, already here, covered, not absent. Like the sun doesn't disappear behind clouds. It is simply obscured by the running, by the noise, by the loops, by the performance, by the trial, by the reaching. And the practice, if you can call it that, is not to create something new. It is to stop adding more noise long enough to notice what's underneath. Not on the good days, not when conditions cooperate, even on your worst days. Even when the trial is in session, even when the loops won't stop, even when the hand reaches for the phone before you've even opened your eyes. Even then, underneath all of that, something is here, has always been here, watching all of it without needing any of it to be different. Nothing changed outside. No insight arrived. No philosophy solved anything. The loop is still there. The trial might reconvene tomorrow. The hand will probably reach for the phone again. But something is different now, not in your life, in the observer, in the one who is watching all of it. Because now you've seen something that was always visible, but somehow never looked at. That behind the performance is a performer who is exhausted. That beneath the suffering is something that is not suffering. That the silence you've been avoiding is not empty. It is the only place where you were ever going to find what you've been looking for everywhere else. Not happiness as a destination, not peace as a reward, just this, here, you, not the story, not the trial, not the reaching, just here. That's all it ever was.